This class is about the Crusades. Crusades are the holy wars. So now this is a map showing us the different crusades that were fought between 1096 and 1204, that is 1204 AD. So you can see this purple color is your Christian land, Christendom, right? Christendom, and from here different people, different rulers, they traveled all the way to the Holy Land. Jerusalem is here. Jerusalem, Acre is here, Tripoli is here, right? So they traveled all the way to this land in order to defend this land from the onslaught of Muslim rulers. So, in this class, we are going to mainly look at the first three crusades and the different people who were involved in these crusades. Again, this map is showing us the direction in which these people from the Christian lands traveled towards the Holy Land. So, the first crusade is depicted using the red arrow here, right? So, most of them they traveled through the land, uh, traveling over Europe to the Byzantine Empire onto the Holy Land, right? And this, when you're talking about the second crusade, you had mainly people from this region traveling towards the Holy Land, and the third crusade is the one wherein you had the English army, the English navy taking the sea route. That is, they took the Mediterranean. So we're going to look at all these things in detail in the coming slides. So now, what were the causes of the Crusades? Crusades have been described as the greatest expression of chivalry, and this came to pass because of this onslaught of Islam. That is, from 6th century AD onwards, Islam had shaken the Arab world. They conquered the Holy Land, Jerusalem, in 635 AD, and by the 7th century, the Arabs were masters of a huge expanding empire. So these Arabs had also converted to Islam, and their kingdoms were expanding. It was not just one kingdom, there were many. They were expanding. And by 10th century, they were a very powerful race, and they were very civilized. They established thriving cities and universities at places like Cordoba, Cairo, Baghdad. All this, please remember, at a time when the West was still in the dark ages. They hadn't even established their universities. So these areas were much, much advanced. And these Arabs who, that is, these Arabs who converted to Islam, they were very tolerant, and Jerusalem under them did not really bother the Christendom at first. Things started changing only later. So now trouble started with the advent of the Seljuk Turks. And who are these Seljuk Turks? They are these people from Western Turkey. That is the modern, and these are the ancestors of the modern Turks of today. So they were the first people to invade this Anatolia Plateau and this great Seljuk Empire. It began the Islamic period in Turkey. And by 11th century, they took control of the Holy Land and they drove out the Christian pilgrims. They conquered large parts of the Byzantine Empire and they later paved the way for the establishment of the Ottoman Empire. So now, till then, that is till the coming of the Seljuk Turks, the Holy Land was under the Arabs, that is the Arab Islams, that is the Arab Muslims. And they didn't have any problem with that because they were quite civilized, they were quite peaceful. Now, all this was disturbed and disrupted with the arrival of the Seljuk Turks. And these people, they were not tolerant or civilized like the other Arab Muslims. These were barbarians. So by 1055, they captured the Caliphate of Baghdad. So even these Arabic areas were under the Seljuk Turks. So by 1095, Pope Urban II, he gave a call to all the faithful to join a holy war to free the Holy Land, that is Jerusalem, from the Seljuk Turks. Now, this is a map of the Caliphate of Baghdad. That is, initially, all these regions were occupied by these Arab Muslims, and they were quite tolerant, and they did not really disturb the Christians coming to Jerusalem or praying there or staying there. They didn't have any problem there. See, Jerusalem is right here in the middle of this Caliphate of Baghdad, or the Abbasid Empire. It was one of the biggest Muslim empires of that time. So things were okay as long as the Arabs were in control. Problem started with the coming of the Seljuk Turks. And we had already seen in the map this kingdom towards the eastern side. The Christian kingdom towards the eastern side is known as the Byzantine Empire, wherein you had countries like Greece, wherein they followed a different kind of Christianity. It is known as the Occidental Church, the Eastern Christian Church, where the prayers and services were a little bit different. So this was the last of the Roman Empire, the last remaining regions of the Roman Empire, that is the Byzantine Empire. Now, this Byzantine Empire was very important to the West because it was part of the Eastern Roman Empire, and this was the last remnant of the Holy Roman Empire after the fall of Rome. So only this much was remaining. The one in yellow color you can see here, only this much of the Eastern Christian kingdom was remaining after the fall of Rome. And this region was geographically as well as politically was very important because it was like a military buffer between Europe and Asia. So Europe on the western side and Asia on the eastern side. So this was like a buffer. It was like a boundary. So the people from this region, that is from the east, could not straight away go and attack the west. They had to subdue Byzantine Empire. Only after that they could move further. So this landmass, I mean this particular empire, was very, very important. And the Byzantine Empire of Constantinople was the only point of contact for the west with the east. So Constantinople is somewhere here. We'll see that in some other map, right? So this was a very important port of call for the west and the only point of contact with the east. So this was very important to the west. Now, with the coming of the Seljuk Turks, that is after their arrival and bearing down on Constantinople, what happened? Constantinople at that time was under Emperor Alexius I. So he was quite helpless. So he turned towards the west for help. And this resulted in the declaration of holy war by Pope Urban II at Clermont in France. And this began the first crusade. So he gave the call for crusades. Uh, what was the reason? Because the Holy Land had fallen into the hands of the Turks and they robbed and harmed the Christian pilgrims. And this was not acceptable to the Roman Catholic Church. And there were many people who exhorted. You had exhorted for this crusade. You had a monk like Peter the Hermit. He exhorted, that is, he called upon all the good Christian men to fight and reclaim the Holy Land. The Pope Urban II, he also knew that this onrush of these Turks, they were advancing further and further. That is, they were advancing more towards the western region. So it had to be stopped. Otherwise, it would endanger the whole Christendom, especially the West. That is, a fall of Constantinople, this fall of the Byzantine Empire would mean the end of the Western Christendom, Western civilization at the hands of these barbaric Seljuk Turks. So it had to be stopped. This is a picture of Pope Urban II. So his call for Crusades. So it would be easy for the Turks to cross the Mediterranean and subdue the Byzantine Empire, thereby getting closer to the West. And the Pope knew that this was a very crucial time. That's the reason he called a council at Clermont, and he said it is the bounden duty. That is, it was supposed to be compulsory and duty of every Christian to rise up in defense of the Holy Land. And what did he promise the people, the Christian believers? The promise of salvation and absolution from all sins. So these were like incentives promised by the Catholic Church. That is, if these men would take part in the Crusades. And three successive batches of knights they tried, but then they were all defeated and killed by the Turks. So now this arrow shows us the march of the Seljuk Turks. So now heartland of the Seljuks, they came from somewhere here in the middle of this region. Uh, this is Anatolia, this region, right? So from here, they started out from here, and then slowly this whole caliphate of Baghdad, Baghdad, we had seen that, right? So that was taken over by them, then slowly moving towards these regions, that is the Byzantine Empire. So if they continue like this without being opposed, it would be like a cakewalk for them just to walk over to the western regions of Europe, and the whole European regions would be under their control. So this map shows us the march of the Seljuk Turks. So now the first crusade was fought in the year 1097. Now, why is it called crusade? It is called crusade due to the red cross that was embroidered on the armor and shields of these soldiers. So they had this insignia, so a white background with a red cross in the middle. That was the symbol of the crusaders, these soldiers. And the leaders of the first crusade, they were members of the feudal noble families. So one prominent leader here was Robert, Duke of Normandy, that is the son of William the Conqueror. These people, they captured Jerusalem from Turks in 1099, and Geoffrey de Bouillon was made the king of Jerusalem. And what happened after this was these people, and that is Geoffrey de Bouillon and his army, they terrorized the Muslims living there, where in Jerusalem. That is after taking control of Jerusalem, which was really unethical, which was not correct. And this alienated the Christians. So the good Christians, they all felt terrified at what was happening, because common people were inconvenienced, common people were being harassed by the Christians after coming to power, which was not right. So now this city was, Jerusalem was strongly fortified, forts were built, and it was protected, and it remained unshaken for the next 1 century. So 100 years or so, Jerusalem after the first crusade was under the control of Christians. So the first crusade was won by the Christians. Here we have some images of crusades, some paintings. You can see the red cross imposed against a black background. You know, the flags they used to carry when they used to go on the war. So by water, by land, they traveled towards the Holy Land. Now this is the map of the first crusade. So from here, that is France. We have seen, right? Now Robert of Normandy was there. So they traveled from here through the Holy Roman Empire into the Byzantine Empire, and then crossing over to the Seljuk area, and then moving towards Jerusalem. The second crusade was fought in 1147 AD, and this was led by the King Louis VII of France. They tried to capture the rest of the Holy Land. Jerusalem was already under them, right? But then the surrounding areas were not under the Christians. They tried to capture the rest of the Holy Land, but they could not. And what was the reason? Because at that time, the emperor was Saladin. He was a very powerful king. So this new star on the Muslim sky, this Muslim firmament in the form of Emperor Saladin, made it impossible for these people to capture the rest of the Holy Land. So he was a unifying force. He unified all Muslims and they swept all Christian armies. And they captured Jerusalem in 1187. So now Jerusalem went out of the hands of Christians into the hands of Muslims, and all these Muslims were united by Emperor Saladin. And the Christian king Gidelusinan, he was taken prisoner. Now this is the map of the Second Crusade. Again, you have the beginnings here from France. The King of France was leading it, right? So again, more or less the same route that was taken by the uh, first Crusaders. Now, the Third Crusade was fought in 1189. This was led by the crowned kings of Europe. It was not just one or two people taking part. So it had become a more or less like a whole Western affair. And this came after the call of Pope Urban II. He called for a crusade in that Council of Clermont. And you have all these people joining forces: Philip Augustus, the King of France; Leopold, the Duke of Austria; Frederick Barbarossa, the Emperor of Germany; Richard I, that is Richard the Lionheart from England. All these men moved towards the Holy Land to fight the Third Crusade. And when you compare all these men, Richard I, Richard the Lionheart, he towered over the rest with his qualities and sense of honor. So he proved his mettle as a brave warrior and soldier in the Third Crusade. Now, Richard was pitted against Sultan Saladin. So they were worthy opponents, and Saladin, he was quite wise and he was quite sensitive. And these were the qualities which were lacking in Richard the First. And also there was this infighting among these European kings due to the question of ego and self-importance. So this destroyed the alliance. If they had been united, all these kings, all these men, then they could have easily routed the Muslims and Saladin and his army from Jerusalem, and they could have reclaimed Jerusalem, but they could not because of that infighting, because they were fighting with each other, trying to figure out who was the greatest among them all. So quite childish, but then this was what happened. And it was only Richard the First who was left out to really carry out the crusade. So Philip Augustus and Leopold, they returned even without striking a single blow. So they set out in all pomp and glory, but then halfway through, because of this infighting, they returned. They did not even strike a single blow. And single-handedly, Richard, he conquered the city of Acre and Arsov, which lie outside Jerusalem. So he almost reached there, but then he could not hold out for more due to depleted forces, because his army was getting reduced. People were dying. So he had depleted resources and depleted forces, because of which he could not advance further and subdue Jerusalem. So he was forced to enter into a treaty with Saladin and he retreated. He came back. But then he had planned that he would go back with more preparation, more people, and then strike back and get Jerusalem. But then history tells us, we know, right, from the lecture that we had on Richard I, that he died thereafter. He died after that. He did not live long after his victory at Acre, and he could never go back and reclaim Jerusalem as he had planned. It did not happen that way. Here we have the pictures of Richard I to the left and Sultan Saladin to the right. So now here we can see the route map of the Third Crusade, which was led by Richard I. So the first navy on the Mediterranean was that of Richard the Lionheart. So he traveled all the way because of this very strong navy that he had. So instead of traveling overland, he took the water route. So the third crusade is in a way different from the other crusades that were fought. But then the end result was they did not uh, reclaim Jerusalem. They did not get Jerusalem.